Hello, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're broadcasting to you this morning on Channel 9 and also on WJOP-LP Newburyport, FM 96.3. We're also live streaming to you on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at www.ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm delighted to welcome today's guest. Robyn Powley is here to increase our awareness of autism. She says that she knew from an early age what her passion was, and she started her career in the field of special education, focusing on emotional and behavior disorders, and later moved on to becoming a Board Certified Behavior Analyst. She consults in schools and with private clients as well, with students who have various diagnoses, including Autism Spectrum Disorders. Robyn, welcome, and thank you so much for visiting the morning show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. This is an honor.
Oh, the honor is all mine, Robyn. Well, Robyn, I hope that we could start with some definitions, because we all hear different terms related to autism, and I think sometimes they can create some confusion in people's minds. So first off, can you help us understand the distinctions among autism spectrum disorders, and Asperger's, and what terms are really preferred by individuals, families, and professionals such as yourself?
So it used to be that there were 4 categories. And in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association, which is in charge of the DSM-5, changed autism to an autism spectrum disorder. So they took away all the categories and made it a spectrum disorder, which is really what it is. And it's categorized as persistent deficits in social communication, interaction, and restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior. That's one sentence that addresses a huge spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's helpful. So the autism spectrum disorders is like an umbrella term.
It is.
That took over from a variety of different categories in earlier DSMs. I'm sorry, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Thank
the
you.
Bible.
It is.
Diagnosis. But there are different versions of it being issued all the time. So a spectrum, of course, implies a range by definition. So Robyn, help us understand the range of behaviors and capabilities that are usually implied as existing along that spectrum.
So you're right, it's an umbrella statement. And so what I always say, and I say this to families and schools, is that when you've met one person with autism, you have met one person with autism.
Yeah, okay.
And that could not be a truer statement, because the spectrum is large, and everyone, much like as individuals who are on the spectrum, are different and have different skills and skill sets. So you have people who are lower on the spectrum who need more support. And then you have those who are higher on the spectrum who used to be the Asperger's category.
Yeah.
But even in those pieces, there are individualities within each person.
Okay. So that is a useful thing to remember. I love the way you put it. When you've met one person, you've met one person. That's probably useful for us to hang on to in many categories in life. William Blake, one of my favorite poets, used to say that to generalize is to be an idiot. So
very true.
Also helpful to bear in mind. Well, Robyn, I'm curious. I know that you said in your bio that you discovered your passion early in life, but I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit more of your story. How did you become interested in particular in focusing on persons and families dealing with autism spectrum disorders? And please, along with that, tell us about the kind of work that you do with children and families, for example, when and why you're called in, and what types of help you provide.
So I knew at an early age, my Aunt Jane Snyder was a close friend of ours and was getting her doctorate in special education. And I think at about 11, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, because I watched the work that she had done. And I started volunteering at a camp for special needs at 11. And that was the direction that I was meant to be in. And along the way, it obviously shifted and changed. I went into special education and got a master's there, and started to shift into emotional and behavior disorders, and started creating programs within schools. and then later in life became a behavior analyst, a board certified behavior analyst, which is a small specialty that practices applied behavior analysis.
Okay.
And so I can explain more about that later to you. But from there, I was in public schools for a lot of years working, and I left public schools to be a consultant because I started to realize that we can only do so much in schools because behaviors occur in the environment where they're taking place. So my work with families occurs in the home where behaviors occur, because when we look at spectrum disorders, we look at teaching in isolation, and those are really hard to generalize. So you may be working with a child at school and they go home and nothing has changed. So my practice is during the day, I consult to many schools as a behavior analyst, and I work with many types of students, consulting with teachers and on curriculum, because part of the spectrum is teaching people how to teach students on the spectrum, because there's different ways of learning. The traditional classroom way may not work. So I look at the child, data informs my decisions. And in the home, I will say that's one of the most rewarding pieces in my work, because it's a hard diagnosis to hear as a parent. And it's the most rewarding for me because one size does not fit all in this spectrum. So my goal is to work with families on knowing that there's hope. And I always tell my families, my job is to work myself out of a job, because I want to give them the skills needed to be successful. And my practice and what ABA does, and I say ABA because it's applied behavior analysis, and that is the best practice according to the Surgeon General and American Psychological Association for treatment for the individuals on autism spectrum disorder. And that is scientifically proven. And with speech pathologists and occupational therapists, we all work together. But what I do is help families based on data, because I'm a super emotional person. But this is the great part, is that my emotions don't have anything to do with my job, which is great, because it's based on data and I make decisions based on data. So I ask families to keep data, and that's where my decisions come from in working with families and in schools.
And then, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? First of all, it sounds like it's really holistic the way you work. And it makes perfect sense because, all of us, I'm sure, remember behaving differently at school than we did at home with our families. And so if you don't look at the whole of the ecosystem, I guess, the emotional and behavioral ecosystem, you'll be missing important pieces. And I love what you say about allowing the data to guide the interventions. And I love what you said about, helping teachers learn the best way to help individual students learn, because we're all different on the spectrum or off the spectrum. We're all different. And so that sounds like an extremely well thought out approach. And it's so interesting to me that it sounds like you were in some ways meant to do this work, because 11 is young. I mean, you had a family model there that helped you fine tune your interest in the field, but it's just wonderful that you were able to understand at such an early age what you really wanted to do. And then it sounds as though you followed those breadcrumbs and you developed a career where you've really been steadily contributing to the health and the success and the happiness of many people on the spectrum and their families and their teachers. So Robyn, that's wonderful. Thank you for that excellent description of how you work. I'm curious, Robyn, because autism spectrum disorders is something that we have learned more about and heard more about within the last couple of decades. And before then, it was, I never heard about it. And so I'm wondering, do you know what the current incidence in the US is of autism spectrum disorders? And also I'm curious about, I've heard, and I would like to find out if it's true, that it tends pretty much to be more something that males are diagnosed with rather than females. So I was wondering if you could address those issues.
Of course. So yeah, in 2020, 1 in 54 children in the United States were diagnosed with the autism spectrum disorder. And I don't think that it's that it wasn't around. More people know about it. And so there's more awareness. So it's not that the incidence of autism are getting higher. More people are getting the diagnosis because the range is large. And it's true. Boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism. And there's a reason for that. I mean, one, girls are very good at hiding this diagnosis because girls are scoring higher on their verbal ability and testing. So they're often misdiagnosed, but they also mimic social behavior of others. They're forcing themselves to make eye contact. So having a diagnosis as a girl with autism is a very different challenge. Very different challenge. And so, and as we go further in this, I'll tell you some stories of some girls who are on the spectrum because it's very different. But what I'll say is that because we've become more aware in the United States of autism, insurance is covering autism services, and that is maybe part of the reason more people are getting the diagnosis because 46 states now cover ABA services, applied behavior analysis services for autism. So it's not that the number is higher, it's that there's more awareness.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. And it's especially interesting to hear about the insurance coverage and the difference that can make. It's so important. So it's good that 46 states, I think you said, but really there should be 50. So anyway, hopefully one of these days before too long, because the children and the families, need the services. So, well, thanks for that explanation. That's fascinating, sort of about the gender differences. It makes perfect sense because girls are culturally and socially conditioned in a different way, but their ability to kind of mask over and kind of like, people pleasing in a way, or mimicking what people expect from them, is going to get in the way then of them being properly diagnosed and starting to receive services that might help them over the course of a lifetime. So that's really interesting and important for people to understand, I think, Robyn. Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Well, Robyn, I'm curious to find out, and there may not be a single answer to this, but I wonder at what age generally do signs of the autism spectrum show up in people? And what are some of the signs that parents or teachers or professionals like yourself see that make them begin to think, maybe an evaluation would be helpful?
So this is my big plug here. Early intervention is key. So a diagnosis can be made as early as 18 months or younger. And it's hard. Pediatricians have a really big job.
Yeah.
And so you could start to see signs at 6 months when your child has limited eye contact. And, you go to the doctor at all those times, the 6 months, the 9 months, but here are the signs when they start to show up. That you don't have that. Autism is a language disorder. So there's that little back and forth of sharing of sounds and expressions. At 12 months, there's a lack of babbling or pointing, reaching, waving. We call it kind of requesting things. Babies cry, so we know to go to them. At 20, so a typical 2-year-old should have 200 words to 1,000 words and 3 to 4 meaningful phrases. And so when you have a 2-year-old who may have few or no meaningful word phrases,
Mhm.
this is a really big red flag.
Yeah.
And I say this because autism can be recognized at many different ages, depending on where you are in the spectrum. But
Mhm.
my real plug is that for parents with younger children to be aware of these things, because
Mhm.
your brain is very malleable at a young age. So without early intervention, you lose skills that you may not be able to get back. And I don't say that to create fear, but what I say it to create awareness, because
Yeah.
our brains can rewire.
Yeah.
So early diagnosis and interventions for children on the
Mhm.
spectrum have long-term positive effects and later skills, because our brains are plastic and malleable. So best practice is, when you have a child who is 3 and coming into, I work a lot with developmental preschools,
Mhm.
is 40 hours a week. I know it sounds a
Wow.
lot
Mhm.
of applied behavior analysis,
Yeah.
because we do BCBAs, Board
Mhm.
Certified Behavior
Mhm.
Analysts, do assessments at those times to see where are the gaps in learning, so that we
Yeah.
can start filling in gaps for
Mhm.
children. And you lose opportunity
Mhm.
if you don't get it early.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
we know this based on a lot of research in this
Mhm.
area.
Yeah.
And to answer your question on other people, I have had people call me to say, I think I may be on the spectrum as an
Ah.
adult.
Ah.
And they may be right, right?
Uh-huh.
So the diagnosis can come at any age.
Yeah.
It's sometimes at middle school when we start to see these social interactions aren't working well.
Mhm.
Why is that?
Mhm.
And so it can, my push is early intervention, because
Mhm.
that's a really key time. But to
Yeah.
answer your question fully, it can be at any time.
Yeah. And which is interesting, and also hopeful, because anytime you are able to get the diagnosis, it sounds like there's so much research that exists now that didn't used to, and more research all the time. There are interventions that can help people cope and succeed in their lives at any age. But I mark what you're saying about early intervention, and to me, it seems like what balances what might be scary about that for people to hear is how hopeful it is, because what you're saying fundamentally is profoundly hopeful, because overcoming the fear to say, I think that my 18-month-old or 3-year-old or 6-month-old is showing some signs that just make me feel afraid. Perhaps that if you get an evaluation, then you actually can rewire the brain because of the plasticity or the malleability, as you say. And that seems to me to be an enormously hopeful thing, and an important message to send out there. So thank you for that. I think that's really important. Well, Robyn, I have another important question to ask you. What are some of the most common misconceptions or misunderstandings or outright wrong things that people assume about people on the spectrum that you've encountered, and how would you like to counter them?
So much like I said at the beginning, you've met one person with autism. You've met one person. And I remember when Rain Man
Oh
came out,
yeah, Dustin
right? And
Hoffman.
then
Yeah.
Savant. And so
Yeah.
at that time, autism was really placed in that category. If you have
Yeah.
autism, you must have special abilities, and show
Yeah.
me your math. And so it's important to teach people that the misconceptions are that everybody is the same, and they
Yeah.
are not the same. So
Mhm.
you can have somebody on the spectrum who's nonverbal, and you are working on skills to create language, but you may have somebody walking down the street who's on the spectrum.
Mhm.
I in preparing for this, Dan Aykroyd is on the spectrum, right? Would
You
we
know,
know that,
I
right?
saw that recently, and who knew? Because he's such a clown.
That's right.
And that's not the image.
That's right. So, and it's a
Right.
good example of,
Yeah.
we all have different personalities, and the same is true. And so I think the misconceptions are that and in talking to parents, is that you have a label, and
Yeah.
labels are so dangerous. And when a parent, and just talking to one parent, once her child was labeled, there created some barriers for her daughter in making friends because she had a label.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
Which is
labels are
sad.
dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, the labels, they kind of cloud one's vision of the living, breathing individual human being in front of you. So, I guess what you're saying is it all goes back to where we began. If you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism, and to make assumptions is to lead one into clouds of misunderstanding, so to speak. So, thank you for that, Robyn. That's really helpful. Robyn, just as autism itself is a spectrum, life itself is a developmental spectrum. And so people on the spectrum are going through a spectrum of life challenges. And so I was hoping that you might talk a little bit about the different kinds of challenges or vulnerabilities that people on the spectrum encounter. For example, childhood is hard enough, but then adolescence, you mentioned middle school, maybe the hardest time of life. So could you talk a little bit about some of the kinds of challenges that persons on the spectrum encounter when they move into adolescence?
So I'm in a middle school right now as we speak. And one of the things that I did was I wanted to make sure I talked to families of clients and past students, because I wanted not just my piece as an educator and professional and clinician, but from a parent's point of view or a child or an adolescent's point of view. And we know that middle school is like a social experiment as it is, right? Navigating the waters of middle school. Nobody wants to go back to middle school.
I've never met anyone, including myself.
So having a social disorder in middle school is so hard because you're working so hard to create relationships and friends, and you want the independence. And so imagine not having those skills. And speech pathologists often talk about a hidden curriculum, and there is a hidden curriculum in middle school. It's a language we don't understand, right? This one's mad at me. This one is mad at me. Why are they? And now we add social media to that. And we have students who are getting in trouble. And they're on the spectrum because they don't understand that hidden curriculum. So as an adolescent in a middle school, navigating that social disorder is so clear, but you may look like everybody else, but you are needing even more support, and adults automatically scaffold. So we automatically, when we talk to children or adolescents, break things down into steps so they can understand. It's just what we do as adults. Their peers can't do that. And so this is a time when we need to be supporting them, but they don't want the support.
They don't want to stand out.
No,
that is one of the rules.
It is one of the rules.
They were beyond me, absolutely, but it's a perfect storm then of challenges is what I'm hearing you say.
Very
it's
much.
Like, I'm sure social media, as you indicate, just doesn't help because that has its own kind of hidden curriculum, and that's just evolving, I think, all the time. So okay.
So young adulthood, I can
that's what I was going to ask you about that, because that brings another set of challenges for all of us. But
for sure. And the hard part about young adulthood is that this is when you really want independence, right? It's a natural progression. You're supposed to want independence. But the skills come at a slower pace, and yet those on the spectrum are held to the same standard. So here's a time where we want our children to get jobs, and they don't want the label, but they still need the support to be highly successful and to be successful and independent, and they don't fit into a box. So one of the pieces to know is that part of the Special Education Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is that children and young adults are able to stay within the special education system until the age of 21. So we have programming within high schools, and high schools are doing a really nice job of work programs and skill building programs for those on the spectrum and those with disabilities. But at 21, you are no longer part of this protection of the school, and you move into state agencies. And at that point, at 21, it's almost like, and people do the best they can, but we have a lack of funding and with state resources, federal resources. And 21, here you go. And you head to college, and you are dependent on different support systems. And I will say Autism Speaks does an amazing job in terms of giving coaching to students heading to college. Colleges are working on developing support systems. But if I can share a story from a parent who, child was high on the spectrum, bright, got into a college, did all the right things, was involved with a coach before going to college on how do you handle college, communicated with the university on what the needs were. All the supports were in place for this young man. Yet a young girl asked, "Can you help me move?" He said, I have Asperger's. This is before the labels had changed, and she knew. So he lent her some boxes to move. And when he didn't get his boxes back, he asked her for his boxes back. Now, understanding that this is a social disorder, he asked her and he asked her and he asked her for the boxes back. And the long story short is that it was then looked as harassment. From there, it went to the administration. He wasn't able, even though accommodations were in place, he wasn't able to have any of those accommodations given to him. And so all the supports were in place. And that first challenge is stating that this is a student who's different. So we need to know, these students need to know they have allies and trusted advisors involved. So there's work to be done. There's work to be done in that area.
An ally at the school who could have gone to the young woman and said, "Give him back the boxes," would have gone a long way as a preventive strategy. So that's really interesting, Robyn, that in spite of all of the supports that were put in place, one social incident there can kind of torpedo a lot of the best planning. But on the other hand, it seems like there's a learning to be had from that, about an additional piece perhaps of that support that might have made a huge difference. And it's simple, but when it's missing, it can create a lot of mischief. So thank you for that. It's really telling. And what about, adulthood and aging? Because that's where we all wind up.
For sure. This is a hard area. This is a very underfunded area. And there are few people I know in the state of New Hampshire. I know of one of my former teachers, my professors in behavior analysis, works in an agency who works with adults, but not a lot of people work with adults. And we look at housing and we look at young adults aging, and many of them end up living with their families. But there's right now, I know in Portsmouth of an agency who's working towards creating housing, supported housing, but there's no funding, right? So you're looking for private funding because it doesn't go away. The older you get, the more support you need to navigate these challenges. And so in terms of day programming, and we need to be a village here and train people who are in businesses to hire people on the spectrum because there are so many skill opportunities at that age. So when you're aging, often you are living with parents, and the goal is to get more housing and more independence, group homes, because these are all places everybody deserves an independent, successful, happy life.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, everybody deserves to not have to live with their parents for the rest of their lives, right?
and many parents
Deserve that, right?
Deserve that too, because of course also the worry, because they won't live forever. And
That's
so
right.
just to be able to feel confident that your adult child will be able to navigate the world on their own when you're no longer there to provide them housing and support. So the challenges continue. So
You do.
oh, well, thank you for that, Robyn. That's really helpful. But Robyn, I wanted to ask you, I know that you have some concerns about issues that can sometimes arise with law enforcement and persons on the spectrum. I had mentioned to you a letter that I'd read in the Newburyport Daily News about police officers in Merrimack, Massachusetts, wearing autism awareness patches on their uniforms. And that was actually what sparked me to think I should do a show on autism awareness. This is a great idea, and to reach out to you. So thank you, Merrimack Police. And I subsequently also read in the Eagle Tribune about the Lawrence Police Department collaborating with the Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation in the month of April, which is Autism Awareness Month, to sell police patches with the autism awareness blue puzzle piece logo on it that Autism Speaks has made popular. They have a lot of really good TV ads now where they show that. So I was hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about some of the issues that can arise between law enforcement and persons on the spectrum and what can or is being done about it.
So right now, Johns Hopkins is creating a training program for police, which is wonderful. And I do think that this awareness is such an amazing start. And what I want to do is change the word awareness to acceptance. And to be an autism ally is a much more powerful statement because it means I'm a safe person for an individual with autism. And right now they are working on, I think you can get autism on your license so that police can be aware that I am dealing with somebody who may have some social challenges, who may respond to me in a different way that's not disrespectful, yet it is a deficit for this person because you could have somebody walking down the street who looks completely neurotypical, who might ignore you. I know there's an episode in Atypical, the show Atypical, where he's walking down the street and the police are calling his name and he's brought into the station. And these are things that really happen. And so I do think this is such a great movement for law enforcement, but remember, we have college security, we have small town police. So I think that we're doing this on in a broad way. And I'm so happy to hear that police are interested in doing this. What I would want to happen is that I'd want these training programs, which I'm happy that Johns Hopkins is working on. I would want them to be trained by professionals in the field of autism and to be talking to people who are on the spectrum about what does it mean to me? What does it feel like to me when this happens? Because and I think it's great to wear that the patch, but what I think is important is to let individuals know that I am a safe person to you, because we want police to be a safe person. And the older they get, the more the challenges are going to occur because those on the spectrum get their license. They may get pulled over. And we know that these social challenges are going to occur. And what's going to happen when somebody's walking up to your car, pulling you over? You can see a perfect storm occurring in that moment. And we don't want that to happen. So there's work to be done in education. There's always work to be done in education, but what a great start. Because look what this did. This created you in having a show on autism.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad to hear about the John Hopkins training. And also, I understand what you're saying about it seems like at the local level, involving professionals such as yourself and also including people on the spectrum to talk about their experiences would be equal or more powerful. So it's good that it's starting anyway, because as you suggest, it's clear that it is much, much needed. Um, well, Robyn, I was hoping that you could share some success stories from your work about strengths and successes that you've seen.
Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start because this is a gift to me. I hear daily from families, and I work with families every day. Because I'm a behavior analyst, I do a lot of consulting. So I miss children a lot because I do a lot of consultation to adulting has become a verb to me. And I feel so lucky when I get to work with students, and success comes in all different packages. And the smallest success is a huge success, especially in early intervention, because what happens in early intervention is once you start intervention, things start to develop very fast. And I'm a research geek. So when I find the latest research, I jump into it. And Greg Hanley is one of my gurus in behavior analysis. And so when we look at applied behavior analysis, we always look at positive reinforcement, always looking at that as the first place to start, because that is what changes behavior. And so my successes, I don't even know how to name them all, Mary, because what happens is that I get emails from parents saying, I didn't know this could happen, or how did you do that? And it's not, they say this is magic. It's not magic, it is science. And that's what I love about what I do. Data tells the story. I get to help people change the beginning, what happens before a behavior and what happens at the end of a behavior. And if we can change those dynamics, people say, this is a miracle. And it's not, it's science. And the more people that I can educate, those are my successes, because it's that I just got an email this morning because I'm working with a shelter in Manchester from a mom who said, you're an answer to a prayer. And I said, I'm not. It's knowing your resources and connecting people to the right resources and seeing success in my students.
Yeah.
That's the biggest joy.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. And I take from what you're describing when people say, oh, it's a miracle, it's like magic, and you're saying, oh, it's science. But I think what that speaks to is the experience parents have had in not having access to resources previously. So it registers on them like a miracle because they tried other things that didn't work. Well, and then your approach using the data and what has proven to be effective does work. And so I think what they're saying is, praise be that we found you, Robyn, because what you did was effective. And it feels like a miracle. So good for you.
Yeah. Oftentimes I with my private families, I'm the last resort. I'm the last resort. Yeah. So they've often gotten extensive neuropsychological evaluations, and they've called this person and how many people can I call to get help? So by the time I get called as a private consultant for families, people are at their last help. They want the help, and they're so open and raw. And I understand that great. It is a great responsibility I have to help them. And I know that responsibility is great. And so those are the times that I say, if you can just have trust in this process, you will see progress. So when that progress happens, that's where I get to be filled. When they say this is working. And in schools, when I'm working with wonderful special education directors who will say, okay, I trust you. I trust in what you're doing. And teachers who will work on the interventions, they say, wow, this
Yeah.
actually, I've had case managers say, this really works. I say, it does. Because being on the spectrum means that your curriculum is different in school. You don't learn the same way.
Right.
So you need a different way of learning. And change is really hard for people. We know that. Change is hard for all of us, but it does mean changing the way that you are working with people.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like it must be a huge relief for the people you work with, and also I can hear how enormously gratifying it is for you. And the 11-year-old in you knew that it would be.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Robyn, I did want to ask, there are more and more persons on the spectrum that show up now in popular culture, on TV and in the movies. You mentioned Atypical, a show that I just love. They keep saying there's going to be another season. I hope there'll be another season because I haven't had enough. It's just charming. And then you'd made reference to Rain Man, the Dustin Hoffman movie, where perhaps it created the expectation that every person on the spectrum was a math savant, and they're not. But I was wondering if you feel that there are other examples of images of persons on the spectrum in popular culture, TV or film, that you think are, that's realistic.
So I think what popular culture has done is humanize people on the spectrum, which is really important. So all these different shows create, because I love Atypical as well, create a face to those on the spectrum. At the same time, when I talk to families, they feel like it might be a bit of a generalization because, once again, it's one person and everybody's child is different. Yeah. And so, and that's with any disorder, right? But it's a beginning, and I'm glad we are having a beginning. And sometimes I think parents think, well, that show doesn't represent my child. Yeah. But it's a start, and we're humanizing something that needs to be more widely shown. And I mean, there's where the benefit of social media comes in, right? Because we always look at the negative pieces of social media, especially now in the pandemic, when all we have is social media to lean on. So it has created a bit of openness, so that there are more people who are coming out on TikTok, or I have teenagers, TikTok and YouTube, all the social media outlets.
And I think that any one show that has one character is almost by definition going to be one character to fit within your framework. Right. But the more shows and representatives there are out there, the more I think implicitly it creates a larger network of different examples of how the spectrum can show up in individuals' lives. So all to the good. Well, Robyn, I was going to ask you about the impact your work had on you. You've addressed that already in certain ways, but if there's anything else you'd like to say about what have you learned from the persons on the spectrum that you've worked with?
Oh, what haven't I learned? I'm always learning, because when you know better, you do better. And so I've been in this career, this field, a long time, longer than a long time. And what I did 25 years ago is very different than what I do now, right? Yeah. We used to be in a closet working with those on the spectrum, and now we are looking at generalization within our community. So what have I learned? Everything. But each student I work with, I learn. And I learn from the people I am training, because there's a learning opportunity in every part of my job
Mm.
because I work with so many different people. I work with administration, I work with police officers, with hospitals, with families, with students, you name it, because I come in contact with so many different people. And with each person, I learn a different perspective. And from that perspective, I get to learn on where I need to work harder or I need to get more research because my field is changing so quickly that I need to stay on top of the research. And it's a piece that we all need to remember in my field is that the research is constantly changing. And it is my ethical responsibility to stay on top of that research because there are new ways of doing things in applied behavior analysis that people aren't doing. Some people are still doing the old ways, but there are new ways that cause less harm. Our job is to not harm, and that, right? And so there are new ways that are with working with children that even amaze me because I study it, I practice it, and I say, even myself, I say, oh my, this actually works. And to me, I say, as a scientist in this, it works. And so I'm always learning. Every student, every parent I listen to, and because every parent can teach me something that I don't know.
Wow. Well, that's just wonderful and inspiring and also very hopeful and kind of exciting. So thanks for that, Robyn. Well, Robyn, we're coming to the end of our show for today, and as we finish up, I'm curious to find out what would be the one or maybe two most important understandings about the autism spectrum that you hope people who've been watching or listening this morning will take away from our conversation?
So the first thing is early intervention. Trust your gut, trust your instinct. You can even find on the internet is and I can send you links, M-CHAT. It's an evaluation, the MCHAT, that parents can go on and fill out. If you are wondering, but if you have that feeling, trust it, because you know your child best. If there may be, you think something wrong, there might be. So trust that feeling, because I can't say enough for early intervention, and I fight for that daily, because we need stronger developmental preschool programming. The other piece is that I think applied behavior analysis gets a bad rap, and because B.F. Skinner was the beginning of this, right? And he trained pigeons.
I get it.
Right. It gets a bad rap for its rigidity. And I think because you're talking to me, I may be the least rigid human being that you've met. And there's just no rigidity in what I do. And one of my ethical responsibilities is to promote applied behavior analysis in a way that shows that it is a field that not only helps those on the spectrum, but is used with all people, in businesses, all disabilities, with typical children. So I really feel like I need to put a plug in for applied behavior analysis, because for me, it's created a data-based structure to what I do. So my emotional self does not have to get involved, but I can still make change that creates success in people. So those are the two plugs I have.
Great, excellent. Thank you for those, Robyn. Well, my last question, Robyn, is if people want to learn more about you and the services you provide, how can they get that information? And more generally, are there resources that you would recommend for people who are just curious and interested and would like to learn more?
So I don't have a website. I went into private consultation after leaving public schools, and I never really advertised because I I've been doing this for a long time, but I do have a Psychology Today. I'm on there, and you can find me on there and call.
And that's the Psychology Today Therapist Finder for
It
everybody.
is,
If
and
you
I'm
just
not.
Google that, you'll
You can
find
Google that. Yeah. And that's where you'll find my name on there and contact me, because that's really all I do to advertise, because usually it's by word of mouth that people find me through, because I work with therapists. I'm not a therapist. I would not be a great therapist, because one of the things I do is I am a straight shooter. I don't want to waste people's time. And I think it's important to just be really direct. And so finding me through Psychology Today, but I think, looking at Autism Speaks, talking to your school systems about what your concerns are, and I want to, in speaking with parents, is being an advocate for your child. Trust your voice. And that is important, because I think as parents, as you try to just be nice and you do the right thing. Trust your voice, because our schools want to do what's best for children. And but we all have learning to do, and we all have places that we need to reach. And we're in a pandemic, and everybody right now is doing the best they can to educate and support our students. But right now it's really hard.
Well, Robyn, thank you so much. It's just been wonderful and joyful to talk to you.
Thank you, Mary. The same to you.
And so informative. And you have increased autism awareness in a way that is bound to promote autism acceptance. So thank you so much for that. It's just been a joy and a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for visiting the morning show.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. It's my pleasure.
Well,
that's it for today's show, everybody. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us next Thursday at 9 on Channel 9 for the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it will be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show at ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon and then click on playlist and scroll down for the morning show with Mary Jacobsen, and you'll find it. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. It'll also be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org and click on the cloud icon and then scroll down. So thank you so much, Robyn. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Well,
for watching. Bye-bye.